A rich CEO was left alone after betrayal until two little girls came up and hugged him. And in that moment, everything changed. One morning, Ethan Cole sat in his office as the most powerful man in the company. Every contract had his signature, every board decision needed his approval. People respected him, feared him, and chased his attention. But that same day, the world he controlled slipped out of his hands. In a single board meeting, the partners he trusted for years betrayed him. They voted him out, cold, final, without a second thought. Before he could breathe, the woman he loved appeared, standing beside one of those same men. Her hand was in his. Her eyes didn't even flinch. By nightfall, Ethan had lost his company, his love, and his friends. He walked the streets alone, feeling the weight of everything crash down. And then from a corner, two little girls ran toward him. Without a word, they hugged him, tight, warm, and without knowing, they began the chapter that would change his life forever. Ethan froze for a moment. In the last 24 hours, he had lost everything that defined him. His position, his wealth, his future. And yet, in this one moment, the warmth of two strangers' arms was doing something no amount of money or power could do. It was reminding him he was still human. He looked down at them. The taller one had bright hazel eyes and messy brown hair. Lily. The younger one, Sophie, had a pink ribbon in her hair and a smile so innocent it made the city's cold air feel softer. "Where are your parents?" Ethan asked, his voice low but gentle. Lily looked around nervously. "They were supposed to come, but we don't know where they are." Ethan glanced toward the park they had come from. It was small, dimly lit, and eerily empty. A gust of wind rattled the swings, making the whole place feel lonelier. He thought about leaving them there, telling himself it wasn't his problem, but something inside refused to let go. "Do you have a phone? Anyone you can call?" he asked. Sophie shook her head. Still clutching the sleeve of his coat, Ethan sighed. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to be, no meeting to run to, no assistant waiting for instructions. He had nothing except the choice in front of him. He could walk away like the world had walked away from him, or he could stay. "Come on," he said finally. "It's cold out here." They walked together toward the corner cafe that was still open. Inside, the warm glow of the lights, and the smell of fresh bread wrapped around them. Ethan ordered hot chocolate for the girls and black coffee for himself. He watched as they wrapped their small hands around the mugs, steam fogging their faces. "Why were you out there alone?" he asked again, softer this time. Lily hesitated, then whispered, "We'll live with someone. But he doesn't like us much." She didn't say more, but the way her eyes darted down told Ethan enough. Sophie leaned against her sister, too young to explain but old enough to understand she was safer here than wherever she came from. Ethan's chest tightened. Just hours ago, he had been thinking about everything he had lost. The company, the money, the woman. But looking at these girls, he realized they had been living without the very things he had taken for granted his whole life: safety, love, trust. The cafe owner, an older man named Carl, recognized Ethan from news articles. "You're Ethan Cole, right? I saw the headlines today. Sorry about what happened." Ethan managed a small nod. The girls looked at him surprised. "You're famous?" Sophie asked. "Not anymore," Ethan said with a dry smile. They finished their drinks. And Ethan knew he couldn't just send them back into the night. "Do you want me to walk you home?" he asked. Lily shook her head quickly. "No, we don't want to go back." That answer stayed with him like an echo. He didn't press for details. Some truths didn't need to be forced. They revealed themselves when the time was right. By the time they left the cafe, the city streets were quiet. Ethan walked with them toward a small motel where he had planned to spend the night. He got them a room next to his, making sure the receptionist knew to call him if there was any problem. The girls smiled for the first time that night as they climbed into the bed, whispering to each other like they were sharing secrets. Back in his own room, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. His world had collapsed in a single day. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. He didn't know why fate had placed Lily and Sophie in his path. But deep down, he sensed that this was only the beginning. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that somewhere in a quiet motel, A man who had lost everything had just found the first reason to start again. Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's guarded stare and Sophie's small hands clutching her sister's arm. He wasn't the kind of man who got involved in strangers' problems. At least, he never used to be. In his old life, there were assistants, lawyers, and publicists to handle anything outside business. But now there was no one else. The motel room was quiet except for the hum of the heater. He sat by the window, watching the city lights fade as dawn approached. At 6 a.m., he gave up on sleep and stepped out into the hallway. The door to the girls' room was still shut, but he heard faint laughter from inside. For some reason, that sound hit him harder than anything else in the past 24 hours. By 7 a.m., he knocked softly. Lily opened the door, her hair a tangled mess but her eyes alert, as if she'd been awake for hours. Sophie peeked from behind her, holding a stuffed bear that looked like it had been stitched back together more than once. "Morning," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "You too hungry?" Sophie nodded instantly. Lily hesitated, studying him like she was deciding whether to trust him again today. Finally, she stepped aside. "Yes, but we can't paid. I didn't ask you to," Ethan replied. They walked down the street to a small diner that smelled of fresh pancakes and coffee. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, brought over a stack of pancakes bigger than Sophie's head. The little girl's face lit up, and for a moment, she looked like any other child, not someone hiding in the dark the night before. As they ate, Ethan tried to find out more. "Do you go to school?" he asked. Lily shrugged. "Sometimes. What about your parents?" Lily's fork froze mid-air. "We don't talk about them." Sophie stayed quiet, suddenly more interested in drowning her pancakes in syrup than answering. Ethan didn't push further. He could see their walls he recognized because he had built similar ones around himself. After breakfast, Ethan walked them back toward the motel. But halfway there, Sophie tugged at his hand. "Can we go to the park?" It was a small request, and Ethan didn't have anywhere else to be. The park was just waking up with the morning. A few joggers, an old man feeding pigeons, and the sound of wind through bare branches. The girls ran to the swings, laughing, their coats flapping in the cold breeze. Ethan stood back, hands in his pockets, watching. It was strange. In boardrooms, he had always known what to do, what move to make next. But here, in this quiet park, he felt like a beginner. That's when a voice broke his thoughts. "You're with them." Ethan turned to see a woman in a worn coat, her face sharp with suspicion. She looked to be in her 40s, her eyes flicking between him and the girls. "Yes," Ethan said slowly. "Why? They live in the building next to mine," she said, lowering her voice. "You should be careful. Their guardian isn't someone you want to deal with." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Guardian?" The woman nodded, looking uneasy. "Man named Frank. Not their father. Not family. Just someone who took them in after their mother disappeared. People in the neighborhood know he's trouble. If he finds out they were with you." She let the warning hang in the air before walking away. Ethan turned back to the girls. Sophie was waving at him from the swing, and Lily was pushing her higher, both of them smiling like the world was finally safe. But now, Ethan knew it wasn't. By the time they returned to the motel, Ethan's mind was made up. He wasn't just going to walk away. He didn't know how yet, but he was certain of one thing. He had lost his company yesterday, but maybe, just maybe, he was about to find something worth far more. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ethan stayed close to the motel, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he knew Lily and Sophie were just a few doors away. He didn't want to admit it yet, but something about them was pulling him in. Maybe because they reminded him of himself, before the suits and headlines, before the world knew his name. That night, as the city lights flickered outside his window, Ethan's mind drifted back to how it all began. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio. His father was a mechanic. His mother worked two-part-time jobs, and money was always short. But Ethan had something no one could take away, an obsession with solving problems. At 12, he was fixing neighbors' radios. At 16, he built a crude computer from scrap parts. By 22, He had dropped out of college to start his first software company, in a cramped apartment with peeling paint and a single desk. It hadn't been easy. He remembered nights of instant noodles, days of rejection from investors, and moments when quitting seemed like the only option. But he didn't quit. Slowly, his ideas started getting attention. Then came the big break. A contract with a Fortune 500 company. From there everything skyrocketed. Cold Dynamics was born in a rented office with 3 employees. Within 10 years it was worth billions. Ethan had everything. The penthouse, the sports cars, the private jet. And with success came people, partners who called themselves family, friends who filled his weekends. And Rachel, the woman who told him she loved him for who he was, not what he had. But money and power don't just attract friends. They attract predators. The cracks began small. A missed meeting here. A quiet conversation between board members there. He ignored the warning signs because he trusted them. He believed loyalty meant something. He thought Rachel's smile meant she was his. Until that morning. The boardroom had been cold. The blinds half closed against the sun. His partners didn't even try to soften the blow. "We've decided to take the company in a different direction," they said, sliding the papers toward him. In fine print, months of planning revealed themselves. Legal maneuvers, share transfers, votes lined up without him ever knowing. And then Rachel walked in. For a heartbeat, he thought she was there to support him. But she didn't stand beside him. She stood beside Mark. One of his oldest friends and now the man holding the title of CEO. No words, no apology. Just a look that told him everything was over. Ethan had signed the papers without a fight. Not because he agreed, but because the betrayal had drained the fight out of him. By sunset, he was out of the building. Out of his home, and out of the life he had built. Now, sitting in that cheap motel room, he realized something. For years, he had thought his empire was unshakable. But it had only taken one day for it to crumble. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Lily holding a paper cup of tea. "Sophie wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. Ethan took the cup, surprised. "For what?" "For not leaving us," Lily said. She didn't wait for his reply, just turned and walked back to her room. He stood there for a long moment. The steam from the tea rising in the cold air. Maybe his empire was gone. Maybe the people he trusted had destroyed everything. But tonight, he had been thanked for something far more important than a business deal. And for the first time since the betrayal, Ethan felt like he had something worth fighting for again. The next morning was colder than usual. A thin fog hung over the street outside the motel, wrapping the city in a pale gray blanket. Ethan had just stepped out of his room when he saw Lily and Sophie sitting quietly on the steps, their breath forming little clouds in the air. They didn't have jackets warm enough for this weather. "You two should be inside," Ethan said, walking over. Lily shook her head. "We're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Before she could answer, a shadow moved through the fog. A man emerged from the street corner. Tall, heavy-set, with a scruffy beard and a cigarette hanging from the side of his mouth. His boots hit the pavement with a slow, deliberate rhythm, and his eyes, cold, sharp, and unblinking, locked straight on Ethan. "Frank," Lily whispered under her breath. Ethan didn't like the way the man looked at the girls. It wasn't concern. It wasn't care. It was possession. "You've been keeping my girls busy," Frank said, his voice low but carrying a dangerous edge. "They were alone," Ethan replied evenly. "I made sure they were safe." Frank stepped closer, the smell of alcohol mixed with smoke heavy on his breath. "Safe? They don't need you for that. They've got me." Ethan could feel Lily's small hand gripping his sleeve, though she tried to hide it. Sophie's face was buried in her sister's side. "You their father?" Ethan asked, not moving. Frank's jaw tightened. "Close enough." "Close enough isn't the same thing," Ethan said. For a moment, silence stretched between them, the fog pressing in, the street empty except for the three of them. Then Frank smirked. "I know who you are, big man, lots of money. Or used to be. Guess you've got time now to play hero. Let me give you some advice, don't." Ethan didn't answer. He watched as Frank flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushed it under his boot, and then leaned down toward the girls. "Go home," he said, his tone hard. Lily didn't move. Sophie clung tighter. Frank's eyes darkened. Now. Ethan stepped between them. They're not going anywhere with you today. Frank straightened slowly. A bitter smile creeping onto his face. You think you can stop me? You've got no idea who you're dealing with. He turned away, but before leaving, he pointed a finger at Ethan. Stay out of my way, or you'll regret it. When Frank disappeared into the fog, Lily's shoulders sagged with relief. Sophie finally let go of her sister's coat. Is he always like that? Ethan asked. Lily didn't meet his eyes. Worse. Ethan's stomach knotted. He had seen dangerous men before, in business, in politics. But this was different. Frank wasn't after money or power. He was after control. And he didn't care who got hurt in the process. Back inside the motel, Ethan knew one thing for certain: walking away wasn't an option anymore. Not after seeing the fear in Lily's eyes. Not after hearing Sophie's silence. For years, he had fought to build his company. Now, he would fight for something else. Something far more important. 2. Ethan didn't leave the motel that entire morning. Frank's words kept circling in his mind. Stay out of my way. Or you'll regret it. He had heard threats before in business. But those were over contracts and stock shares. This was different. This was about 2 children who had no one else to stand between them, and a man like Frank. Around noon, he knocked on the girl's door. Lily opened it slowly, her eyes searching his face as if trying to guess why he was there. Sophie was sitting on the bed, drawing on a piece of paper with a broken crayon. I'm taking you somewhere, Ethan said. Where? Lily asked cautiously. Somewhere safe. Lily's gaze dropped to the floor. Frank will be angry. Let him be, Ethan said firmly. You don't have to be afraid of him anymore. The girls didn't move right away. Trust didn't come easily to them. Ethan could see that. So, he knelt down, leveling his eyes with theirs. I've lost a lot in my life recently. I know what it's like to feel like no one's on your side. But right now I'm on yours. Something in his voice must have reached Lily, because she finally nodded. Okay. They left the motel quietly. Ethan keeping an eye on every corner, every passerby. He didn't know how much reach Frank had, but he wasn't going to take chances. The safe place he had in mind was on the other side of the city. A small, discreet shelter run by an old friend of his mother's named Martha. She had been running it for decades, offering food, beds and protection to women and children with nowhere else to go. When Martha saw Ethan walk in with Lily and Sophie, her brows lifted in surprise. Ethan Cole, she said, pulling him into a quick hug. Haven't seen you in years. What brings you here? He glanced at the girls. They need help. And I think they need it now. Martha's eyes softened as she crouched to greet them. Hi there. I'm Martha. You're safe here. Sophie hid behind Lily, but Lily gave a small nod. While Martha led them to a small, cozy room with 2 beds, Ethan stayed back, scanning the place. The shelter was quiet, but sturdy, reinforced locks, cameras at the entrance, staff who clearly knew how to handle trouble. When Martha returned, she crossed her arms. You've stepped into something complicated, Ethan. Who are you protecting them from? A man named Frank. Ethan replied. From what I've seen, he shouldn't be near them. Martha's expression darkened. I've heard the name. You're right to keep them away. But if he thinks they belong to him, he won't give up easily. I'm counting on him not giving up, Ethan said. Because neither will I. Martha studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. I guess you're still the same. When you decide to fight for something, you don't stop. Ethan didn't say it out loud, but inside, he knew this fight was different. In business, you could lose a deal and try again tomorrow. Here, losing wasn't an option. By the time he left the shelter that evening, the girls were eating soup at a small table, talking quietly to each other. For the first time since meeting them, Ethan saw Sophie smile without hesitation. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him certain he had done the right thing. As he stepped out into the cold night, he knew Frank wouldn't stay quiet for long. But for now, Lily and Sophie were safe. And that was all that mattered. It didn't take long. 2 days after Ethan had taken Lily and Sophie to the shelter, trouble came looking for him. He was walking back to the motel from a small diner when he noticed the black SUV parked across the street. Its engine was running, exhaust curling into the cold night air. He could feel the weight of eyes on him. He kept walking, pretending not to notice. But as he reached the motel steps, the passenger door of the SUV swung open. Frank stepped out. This time he wasn't alone. 2 men followed, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that spoke of experience in violence. Frank's smirk was the same as before, but his tone carried more venom. "You've got nerve, Cole," he said. "Taking what's mine." "They're not yours," Ethan replied evenly. "And they're safe now." Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "Safety? You think some charity hole in the wall will keep them from me? I've been in this game a long time. I know every back door, every person who owes me a favor. You can't hide them forever." Ethan didn't flinch. "Then I'll stand in your way forever." One of Frank's men stepped forward, but Frank raised a hand. "Not yet." He took a slow step toward Ethan, leaning close enough for Ethan to smell the stale whiskey on his breath. "This is me being polite. Next time, I won't be." Ethan's fists tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "You've made your choice, Frank. Now I've made mine." Frank studied him for a moment, then smiled. Not the smile of someone amused, but the smile of someone already planning his next move. He turned, climbed back into the SUV. And the vehicle pulled away, melting into the night. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the quiet hum of the city around him. He knew this was only the beginning. Frank wasn't bluffing. He would come again harder. Back in his motel room, Ethan picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. When the voice on the other end answered, Ethan said only one sentence. "I need a favor and I need it now." The person didn't ask why. They simply said, "Where do we start?" Ethan looked out the window, toward the faint glow of the shelter across the city. Lily and Sophie were sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering outside. For years, he had fought for profits, mergers, and market share. Now, the fight was simpler, and far more dangerous. This wasn't about winning a boardroom battle. This was about protecting 2 little lives. And Ethan Cole wasn't going to lose. The call Ethan made that night paid off by morning. At 7 a.m., a black sedan pulled up outside the motel. From it stepped Marcus Hale, a former military contractor, and one of the few men Ethan had trusted back when his company handled high-risk international deals. Marcus was tall, broad, and carried himself like a man who had walked through too many dangerous nights to be rattled by anything. "You always had a way of finding trouble," Marcus said as he stepped into Ethan's room. "This time," Ethan replied, "trouble found me. Over coffee." Ethan explained everything: Lily, Sophie, Frank, and the shelter. Marcus didn't ask why Ethan cared. He didn't need to. Some things didn't require explanation. By midday, they were parked in an alley across from the shelter, keeping watch. Ethan didn't want to bring danger to the building, but something told him Frank was too proud to let his warning go unanswered. That instinct proved right. At exactly 20:47 p.m., a gray pickup truck slowed near the shelter entrance. 2 men jumped out, not Frank, but the kind of men who did his dirty work. They moved fast, heading straight for the door. Ethan was out of the car before Marcus could say a word. "Hey!" Ethan's voice cracked through the cold air. The 2 men turned, sizing him up. One smirked. "Stay out of this, Cole, not a chance," Ethan said, stepping closer. The bigger of the 2 reached inside his jacket. But Marcus was suddenly there, gripping the man's wrist and twisting hard. The thug yelped as a small blade clattered to the ground. The second man lunged at Ethan. Years in corporate life hadn't softened his instincts. Ethan sidestepped, grabbing the man's coat and slamming him into the side of the truck. The air left the thug's lungs in a sharp grunt. "Tell Frank," Ethan said, his voice like steel, "that the next time he sends someone, they won't walk away." Marcus shoved the first man toward the truck. The 2 scrambled inside and sped off, tires screeching. For a moment the street was silent except for Ethan's heavy breathing. Inside the shelter's window, Lily and Sophie stood frozen, eyes wide. Martha was behind them, her phone in hand, having clearly been about to call the police. Ethan walked to the door. "They won't try that again so openly," he told Martha. Martha looked at him for a long moment. "They'll try something worse next time." That night, Ethan sat in the motel room, replaying the fight in his mind. He wasn't shaken, but he was sure of one thing: Frank was escalating. The next move wouldn't be a warning. It would be an attempt to take the girls by force. And when that happened, Ethan needed to be ready. 2-3 quiet days passed after the fight outside the shelter, but Ethan knew better than to relax. Frank wasn't the type to lick his wounds in silence. He was the type to plan, to strike harder the next time. On the fourth evening, Martha called. Her voice was low, tense. "Ethan, you need to come here. Now." When he arrived, Lily and Sophie were sitting at the small dining table in the shelter's common room. Sophie's eyes were red from crying, and Lily was holding something tightly in her hands. A folded piece of paper, creased from being opened and closed too many times. Martha gestured to Lily. "Show him." Lily hesitated, then handed Ethan the paper. It was an old photograph, grainy, but clear enough. A young woman with soft brown hair smiled into the camera, holding 2 toddlers in her arms. "That's our mom," Lily said softly. Ethan nodded. "She's beautiful." Lily's voice trembled. "Frank, he's not just some man who took us in. Hey, he's our uncle. Mom's brother." Ethan's chest tightened. "Your mother, what happened to her?" Lily's eyes dropped. "She died 2 years ago. Car accident. After that, Frank showed up. Said he'd take care of us. At first, he was nice, but then things changed. He started using us, making us run errands, telling us to lie for him. Yelling when we didn't do things right. We weren't allowed to talk to anyone else." Ethan glanced at Martha. "And you didn't know this?" Martha shook her head. "They never said. Probably too scared." Ethan turned back to Lily. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Lily's voice cracked. "Because part of me still hoped he cared about us. That maybe he'd be different." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the truth settling over all of them. Ethan finally spoke, his voice steady. "This changes everything. If he's family, he's not just going to walk away. He'll think he has a right to you." Sophie's small voice piped up. "But we don't want him. We want to stay here. With you." Those words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He had been protecting them, because it was the right thing to do. But now, it was more than that. These girls had chosen him. Trusted him. And he wasn't about to let that trust be broken. That night, back at the motel, Ethan sat at the small desk with the photo in his hands. He thought about his own life. The people who had betrayed him, the empty success he had chased, the loneliness that had crept in long before the company fell apart. Maybe, just maybe, this fight wasn't just about saving them anymore. Maybe it was about saving himself. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. "It's time," Ethan said. "We stop waiting for him to come to us." If Frank had been playing offense since the beginning, Ethan decided it was time to change that. Marcus tracked him down within hours. Frank's operation wasn't hard to find once you knew where to look. A rundown warehouse on the edge of the city, fronted by a fake import business. Trucks came and went at odd hours, but most of the real work happened at night. By 11 p.m., Ethan and Marcus were parked 2 blocks away in the black sedan. Rain drizzled across the windshield, blurring the flicker of a single yellow bulb over the warehouse's side door. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm done waiting for him to hurt them again." They moved quickly. Marcus picked the side lock in seconds, and they slipped inside. The warehouse smelled of oil, damp concrete, and the faint trace of something chemical. Stacks of crates lined the walls, their labels peeled off. 2 men sat at a folding table playing cards. Marcus motioned to Ethan, "Quiet." They crept closer, then moved in at once. Marcus grabbed the first man by the collar, slamming him against the wall, while Ethan wrenched the other's arm behind his back. "Where's Frank?" Ethan demanded. The man grimaced. "Upstairs. Office at the end." Marcus tied them with zip ties and gagged them. The 2 moved silently toward the metal staircase. Their footsteps barely a whisper against the cold steel. At the top, they found the office. Glass walls, blinds half closed, light spilling through in thin stripes. Frank sat at the desk, leaning back in his chair, phone to his ear. Ethan didn't knock. He kicked the door open. Frank froze for half a second, then smirked. "Well, if it isn't the hero." Ethan stepped forward, rainwater dripping from his coat. This ends tonight. Frank's hand slid under the desk. But Marcus was faster, kicking the chair sideways so Frank crashed to the floor. A small pistol skidded out of reach. Ethan grabbed Frank by the collar and hauled him up. You want to fight with me? Fine, but you stay away from those girls. Frank laughed, a low, mocking sound. You think you can scare me? You have no idea who I'm working with. Ethan tightened his grip. Then tell them to send someone better than you. Frank's eyes flashed with something dangerous, but Ethan saw something else too. A flicker of doubt. They shoved him back into his chair and walked out, leaving the pistol on the desk. Back outside, Marcus glanced at Ethan. You know this won't stop him. Ethan nodded. No. But now he knows I'm not running anymore. Somewhere deep down, Ethan understood. This wasn't the final fight. Frank's words had been more than a threat, they were a warning. Whoever was backing him was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous. And that meant the real battle hadn't even started yet. 2-3 nights after confronting Frank, Ethan got the call he'd been expecting, but dreading. It was Lily's voice, whispering, trembling. Ethan, they took Sophie. His grip on the phone tightened so hard his knuckles turned white. Where are you? I'm still at the shelter, she sobbed. They grabbed her when we were coming back from the corner store. Martha tried to stop them but her voice cracked. It was Frank. Ethan didn't waste another second. He called Marcus. They've crossed the line, Ethan said. We finish this tonight. Marcus didn't argue. Through Lily's panicked directions, they traced Frank to an abandoned riverfront storage yard. Old cargo containers rusted in crooked lines, and the night air smelled of wet metal and diesel. A single floodlight lit the center yard, casting long, sharp shadows. Frank was there, holding Sophie by the arm. She was crying, calling out for Ethan. Let her go, Ethan's voice tore through the night. Frank smirked. You should have walked away, Cole. But now, you've forced me to teach you what happens when you get in my way. From the shadows, more men stepped forward. 6 of them, rough, armed with bats and pipes. Marcus moved to Ethan's side, his eyes scanning every angle. Get the girl. Marcus murmured. I'll keep them busy. It happened fast. Marcus charged the nearest thug, swinging hard. Ethan sprinted toward Sophie, ducking a swing from one man and driving his shoulder into another's ribs. Sophie broke free from Frank's grip and ran into Ethan's arms. But Frank wasn't done. He lunged, pulling a knife from his coat. The blade flashed under the floodlight as he came in fast. Ethan twisted, grabbing Frank's wrist. They struggled, their feet sliding on the wet ground, until Ethan slammed Frank into the side of a container. The knife clattered to the dirt. This ends now, Ethan growled. Frank spat in his face. You can't protect them forever. Ethan hit him once, hard enough to drop him, then grabbed Sophie's hand and pulled her toward the edge of the yard, where Marcus had already dropped 3 men. The others hesitated, seeing their leader on the ground. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police, maybe Martha, maybe Lily. The thugs scattered. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the yard. Officers swarmed in, cuffing Frank and loading him into the back of a patrol car. As the door slammed shut, Frank's eyes locked on Ethan's, promising that this wasn't over. But for now it was. Back at the shelter, Lily ran into Ethan's arms the moment he walked in with Sophie. Both girls clung to him like they never wanted to let go. Are you staying? Sophie asked softly. Ethan looked down at them, feeling something deep in his chest shift. The same way it had the moment they first hugged him on that street. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Months later, Ethan's life looked nothing like it had before. He wasn't the CEO of a shiny skyscraper anymore. But he had something better. He worked with Martha to expand the shelter, used his business skills to get funding, and spent his evenings helping the girls with homework or taking them to the park. The betrayal that had once destroyed him had led him here. To a new family, a new purpose. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole was truly happy. Sometimes life takes everything from you, just to give you back something better. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Because the next one might just change the way you see the world. Thanks for watching.